This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info, and if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Has arrived.
I would like you to meet Ares, the ultimate AI soldier.
He is biblically strong and supremely intelligent.
You think you're in control of this? You're not.
On October 10th.
What are you?
My world is coming to destroy yours, but I can help you.
The war for our world begins in IMAX. Tron Ares, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Only in theaters October 10th. Get tickets now.
Welcome to
Only Murders in the Building,
the official podcast.
Join me, Michael Cyril Creighton, as we go behind the scenes with some of the amazing actors, writers, and crew from season 5.
The audience should never stop suspecting anything.
How can you not be funny crawling around on a coffin?
No, that's true.
Catch Only Murders in the Building official podcast, now streaming wherever you get your podcasts. And watch Only Murders in the Building, streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
Well, hello, listeners. It's Anthony here, and today I will be leading our discussion. I am joined, of course, again, by Alexander and Jacob.
Hi, this is Alexander.
And this is Jacob.
Yeah, as we continue to look at Wrong Station as it was, as it is, and how it may be. Last time, we gazed back at our previous 9 seasons, chatted about how the show has changed and how it stayed the same. We were looking at the show's face, the Wrong Station as you, the listener, see and experience it. Today, though, we're going to get into the guts, the terrible, bloated guts, and talk about what we've learned about making an audio drama. Now, an important distinction here, this is not how to make an audio drama. This is some of what we've learned in the making of this particular show. Although, if you want to throw some generalities my way later, we can get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty. There are many ways to make an audio drama, as there are many different genres and subgenres within this medium, which takes me to my first train of thought, because I think this is something that stops or slows a lot of people who would otherwise be creating art from making it, which is that we did not know when we made it that Wrong Station would be a successful show. And we did not make it with the intent of being a success, however you want to define that. We made Wrong Station, as we talked about last time, because we wanted to. The genre interested us, the medium interested us. We certainly wanted to make the show as well as we could at the time and hoped that people would enjoy it. But we would have been okay if it hadn't, and we would have learned some lessons and moved on to the next project. But, what do you two guys think of that? As it applies either to all art or specifically to our show, or in the projects that you guys have worked on, whether it's the TV shows you've worked on, or Alexander, you've written a book, you're working on another book. Is making the thing itself a success to be celebrated? Jacob?
Yeah, I think maybe we're getting right out of the gate a little bit philosophical, but you have one life, and if there's something you want to make, you should make it, because you will not get another chance to make it after this life is over. And Wrong Station is kind of that. Like I joined the project, as I mentioned before, like in the 3rd season, and the reason that I joined was because I listened to it. I was like, I want to make this. I need to be involved in a project like this. And they were, Anthony and Alexander, thankfully, had wanted me involved for a little bit. And once I was on board, I was like, yeah, I get to make the thing now. And you can't replace that feeling of getting to do the thing that you want to do. And so much of life, especially modern life, is people telling you not to do the thing that you want to do, or going to work for 8 hours at a job that you don't enjoy, and kind of getting tricked into thinking that that's what all life is supposed to be, is just doing stuff that you don't really want to do. And yeah, you just kind of have to take that back. You have to do the things that you want to do. You have to do the art that you want to make.
And I bring that up because I talk to a lot of people who want to make a show or are working on a show that's in pre-production, and there's sometimes this feeling of like, oh, it has to be perfect. I have to workshop this. I have to make sure I have all the best stuff, the best cast, the best writing, the best equipment possible to make this. But as we talked about last time, when we started Wrong Station, we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. I was recording in my basement with a USB microphone, and we wanted to make something good, but I don't think we had any illusions. We certainly didn't expect to be here in 10 years' time. And I think failing is an important part of learning, and not necessarily failing just going up in smoke and falling flat on your face, but putting something out there and getting consensus and seeing what works and what hasn't, and going at it again. Whether it's the second season of a show, or if you did like a shorter form project and you're moving on to the next project, it's important to like get stuff out of you and learn from that experience and talk to your peers and your audience about it, I think
we all compare everything that we make to the best thing that the people we like most have made. And we don't see how that sausage gets made, where, a show that is really good is often the product of a team that has worked together several different times. And has often made shows that aren't as good. A good novel is usually not the first novel that someone's written. I think one of the things that made this show really work for me was that it was something that I wanted to do. It was something that was fun, but it wasn't something that I had to do. The show wasn't my baby. And so I was okay with it being imperfect, because I was just throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck. And now that we've been doing it for 10 years, it's taken on a sort of grandeur and dignity, as anything that lives long enough does. But that this is the show as it exists now, which I think is this well-oiled machine, which is really, really professionally made, and I'm really proud of the writing, wasn't always that. And if you were to start listening to the show now and think, oh God, like anything that I would make that is like this wouldn't have the same polish. Well, that's because there's been 10 years of like grinding rocks together to get that finish.
Yeah, and I think that this focus that we have on the final product is itself a challenge to artists. When we look at a final product, like Alexander was saying, and you think to yourself, oh wow, I could never do something that good. Well, that's not even really the point of making art for 99% of people, and 99% of the projects that even the people that make art, they're not necessarily trying to make something perfect. I think if it's something that you want to do, one of the beautiful things about making a show like this is it's fun. It's an enjoyable process. And if you can focus on the moment, and if you can focus on the experience of actually making the thing, you'll find that you're having a very good time.
That's also chasing the dragon of like, what should I write about? What should I do? You should write about what you're interested in and what you want to write about, and feel like you can write about.
And if you don't know what that is, take some time to figure it out. It's a wonderful thing. Either write, read,
perform, make music.
Yeah, anything. All art kind of has that similar sort of wellspring that it springs from. You can learn a lot about yourself just by doing stuff that you enjoy. Again, it feels like, I don't know, I feel like I'm a crazy idealist saying stuff like you should do things that are nice for you. And I feel like I can see the audience like crossing their arms and being like, well, isn't that fine and dandy for you? But like truly, and I'm not trying to be a scold or anything like that. I just think that like if you do something that's fun, you will learn about yourself while doing it and have a good time.
And if you don't, you quite simply won't be able to produce. I mean, you can produce one work of writing or art out of, a place of deep misery, but you can't build a practice of writing out of it. At some point, you have to have some sort of positive emotion to harness yourself to pull yourself forward. Otherwise, you'll burn out.
Yeah, people always use like Van Gogh as an example where they're like, well, great suffering can produce great art. And I think when people hear that, they think that what that means is that like, oh, well, when you're in the depths of despair, you'll make your best stuff. And really what it means is that like despair, the processing of despair, coming out of despair is an opportunity to make things that are inspired by that despair. But you're not actually in the depths when you make that art. And Van Gogh, in his actual diaries from that era, he did all his best work when he was like feeling good. Like he would write a journal entry that was like feeling good today, got like, it would be in another language obviously, but he's like, I'm feeling
It was in Dutch. So, feeling good today.
This is a famously anti-Dutch podcast. But
Famously.
He's
pro-Portuguese.
Pro-Portuguese, anti-Dutch. But yeah, but like Van Gogh did his best work when he was feeling good. Yes, he was a very depressed person, but when he was happy, he was painting. And when he was painting, he was happy.
Mm.
Well, that dovetails nicely into another idea. Not Van Gogh. I don't know if Van Gogh dovetails into anything, but just writing what you want to write. Guys, have your feelings changed with regard to the type of writing you do for this show? And, we touched on this last time a bit, that we started off with this very particular style. I think for my part, obviously, I feel like I've sharpened as a writer a fair bit over the years, but I definitely still gravitate towards a particular type of story. I used to work on an oil rig, and my father was a bad man, and I'm a bad man. And I definitely feel that ultimately a Wrong Station season ought to have some episodes like that. Though I've certainly stretched out more. I was going to say my wings, but I guess this last time I've stretched out my legs a bit more with setting and tone. Also with our, I guess you'd call them the trailer episodes or the non-episode episodes. Your Please Considers and FOIAs and very special isolation episodes. I feel like I get my hands in those a lot. And that kind of feels like this secondary voice of the show as well.
A lot of the Patreon content in a similar sort of vein.
The insane Patreon content. But what do you think?
Sign up for our Patreon.
Yeah. Is it important for a show like this to have an in-house style or voice? And have you felt like you could experiment within that box? Or has it felt restrictive at times?
I think one of the things that I love doing about this show is because it's an anthology, I have so much stylistic and creative freedom, and I can do whatever I want. And a lot of how I produce scripts is I'll read a new writer and think, oh, I want to write my version of one of their stories. And I'll sit down and I'll try and do it. In the early seasons, we really tried to stick with a sort of first-person radio play kind of aesthetic. I found that really restrictive, and I found myself just sort of breaking out of that. My instinct is to write third-person genre stories. First-person feels I like to work in that genre sometimes, in that format sometimes, but it doesn't feel like home for me. It was a bit of a conversation about whether we could expand to third-person stories. I'm very glad that we did. I think our house style is less about specific styles or genres or aesthetics or techniques and more about a thoughtful approach. I think that when we do our second drafts of stories, we are really rigorous about stopping to think about what is happening underneath the surface of the story, what the story is about, what it's saying. We're really careful to make sure that the story is saying what we want it to say, that the meaning of the story is something not like in control of, but have an understanding of. And sometimes, you'll sit down to write a story and you'll be trying to capture a vibe and an aesthetic, and you'll be working against it, and you'll end up with something that is saying sort of the opposite of what you want to do, what you want it to say because of, maybe certain genre tropes. And I think our house style, so to speak, is just a mindfulness about that and a rigor about the thematic content of our stories more than any sort of stylistic thing.
But I think also, secondarily, and we didn't mention this last time, is that turning of the screw. Because I think that's been a thing since day one. And maybe that's just like the kind of people we are and the kind of media we like to consume. But I think there's always been this idea that if someone else is going to turn the screw once, we're going to turn it twice. If someone else is going to turn it twice, we want to turn it 3 times.
The metaphor Jacob always uses is, not turning the doorknob left or right, but up.
Yeah. And it's not about being novel or not being obvious, but it feels like there is something to be gained by busting through that drywall that ultimately benefits the story. To not just stop where you think you ought to stop, but go a little bit further, to push beyond whether it's a sense of dread or discomfort or whatever it is.
Yeah, to go in a direction that people maybe don't expect. I think it comes from, in many ways, what Alexander was describing, this idea of, reading something and then wanting to write your version of it. I think when we want to write a version of something, sort of implied in that idea is that we're not copying it. And I think because so much of Wrong Station is inspired by the art that we consume and the thoughts that we have and the things that we engage with. We don't want what we're making to just follow along. We don't want to paint by numbers. We don't want to insert a twist just because the genre trope says that a twist is supposed to go there. If there's going to be a twist, it's going to be something that we like, that we come up with. You know, maybe someone's done something like it at some point in some other story that we haven't read. But as far as we know, this is something that's original. This is something that comes from us. Yeah, if it's not original, it's at least personal. It's at least something that comes naturally from our own process.
Yeah, and I think that's the applicable lesson if you're trying to grab something from this.
Yeah, you should try and it comes back to what we were saying before. You should make a show if you want to make a show. But what that also means is that you should honor that desire and make the show that you would make. It can sound similar to someone else's stuff, but it can even have, you know, tropes or things that, you know, you've seen in other work, but at the end of the day it should be from you. It should be yours, and you should get used to knowing what that feels like.
When people have asked us, and it doesn't happen too often, but when people have asked us, how do I love Wrong Station, I want to make something like Wrong Station, which is it's a beautiful thing, and I'm always flattered to hear that. I'm never worried about giving advice freely, because whatever you make, that person makes, it's, even if you're wanting to make something like Wrong Station, it will be your own thing. It will be influenced by you and your styles and your history of reading and media consumption and your personal history.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about anyone ever eating our breakfast, because I know that no one has our particular preoccupations and foibles and even artistic shortcomings. You know, I think the ways in which I feel bad about my own writing are often what produce things that are interesting and weird. And maybe the story's not perfect, but it has this sort of freshness and uniqueness that is maybe born out of its imperfection.
Yes, and I do have so many foibles.
No one else can fail in the same way that I can.
And the other side of that is true as well. We're not worried we're going to eat anybody else's breakfast either.
No.
Like, for the same reason. I was going to say about just what you were saying, Anthony, about this experience of, you know, writing, you know, I guess what we've all been saying about this experience of writing from yourself, you know, using your own instincts. Something that I love about the show is that because it's an anthology, as Alexander pointed out, what that means is that, like, the boundary of what we can put into the show changes as we put things into the show. You know, if we introduce the third person element to the show, then all of a sudden third person is on the table. If we introduce historical fiction, suddenly historical fiction is on the table. Like, the stylistic choices that we make are also trailblazing new territory that we can eventually, you know, travel through. And
if we go
I think
space,
about how
then Jason X is on the table.
Yeah, exactly. We go to space and we can do Jason X. But I love writing for Wrong Station in part because I get the opportunity to do once a season, 2 times a season, as often as I want. I can do something that I have never seen before. I can jump into a completely different space. I'm thinking specifically about Eloise Kestrel, which was a real, I don't know if it's a labor of love or just a labor, but it took a while. But the process of writing that episode was like, I really want to do something I haven't heard before personally, and I want to write an episode that is a self-guided tour through an art gallery. How do I do that? How do I make that happen? How do I put that into the world? And that process of discovery was really enjoyable. It took a long time, but it was really enjoyable.
That's a good one. You both mentioned how doing what we do is a little bit easier because we are an anthology. And I definitely agree. The show works as an anthology, and clearly our individual processes of work well with an anthology. I'll go so far as to say I do not think we could make as much Wrong Station as we have if we were an episodic show. I really applaud our peers and anyone who makes these serialized, episodic, big ensemble cast shows, because having contributed to a few myself, I can see that it is an order of magnitude more work. Orders of magnitude, which I suppose is something to consider for, you know, anyone who's planning their own series. I mean, we've slightly dipped our toes. We've done a few multi-parters here and there. But what do you two make of that? Do you think lessons that we've learned from making Wrong Station could be applied to making a longer form narrative show?
I don't want to make a longer form narrative show. I would love to do sort of like a serialized novel, like do a longer project within the confines of Wrong Station. I think the lessons we've learned from doing the show would lend themselves really well to putting together maybe an 8-part or a 10-part or even a 15, 20-part series. I wouldn't want to do more than that. I think the danger of doing a really long continuing episodic story is that stories need to end to be satisfying, and you need to end a story in order to understand what it's about and what it means and what it is to be taken away from it. And I think if you don't do that, then you end up in sort of sitcom world, and you can tell really satisfying stories in sitcom world. You can have 100-episode shows where every episode is sort of about its own thing and tells a complete story. But I think the draw for me of doing a longer form serialized or episodic show is the ability to tell a bigger story and to take more time. I think we could do it. I think it'd be really interesting to do it. It's just a ton of work. It takes a lot of work to think through and break and build a longer story. The amount of work it takes to build a story, I think, does increase exponentially as it gets longer.
You can't do the shit we do where it's like, oh, what are we doing this week? I'll fucking write something. You can't do that. You gotta have the whole thing written like a year in advance.
Yeah, like now it's like, oh, the way you put it, like, oh, I'll do, well, I'll drag something up from my id from like 30 years ago and turn it into art, and that's something you can do in a 2-week turnaround with a space of 3,000 words. But if you're trying to make it part of a continuing story, then I think things start to feel disjointed and loose. It's really hard to create an artistic unity with a project like that unless you are writing it in advance and really thinking it through.
Yeah, and I think the other that you're sort of touching on this, but I think it's also good to make it explicit that one of the reasons that Wrong Station has existed for as long as it has is because we found a way of making the show that's very budget friendly and timeline friendly as well. But this is Anthony is I believe recording this episode right now from his booth, and we're going to post some clips from these episodes, and you'll see that it's a well put together booth, but it is something that Anthony built, using the tools that he had at his disposal to create a space in which he could do this work.
It's humble. And I'm hoping it's edited vertically so you can't see the PVC pipe behind me.
But like humble in the way that I don't know, building your own shovel like 1,000 years ago was humble, where you've created an essential tool for your life. And that
the humble shillelagh.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You've built something to beat our heads in. No, I don't know. I think that it's important to acknowledge that making a show like this, it is absolutely possible. Audio is already less expensive than having to edit visually, having to film, do all of that work. We're talking about orders of magnitude, like the cost of making TV or film, the orders of magnitude are crazy there. To make a show like Wrong Station, one of the ways that we cut down even further on the cost was by switching almost exclusively to solo narration, which allows Anthony to either be the only performer or allows Anthony to direct only one performer. And that makes the show so much more achievable and allows us to do these 2-week turnarounds. Because if Anthony had to go and find 3 additional actors for an episode, you can't write it in 2 weeks. You can't, that's just not enough time.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. The first few seasons of Wrong Station were recorded on I don't know what to call it, lower quality.
Blue Yeti.
Not a Blue Yeti, thank God. A Samson C whatever. Please.
Yeah, a little better. Come on.
In my basement, and it wasn't great. I don't love to go back and listen to it, but it was serviceable and it worked. And what I would say for that, if you're concerned about oh my God, I don't have the right equipment, the space you're recording in is a lot more important than the equipment you're using. A high-end microphone in a big echoey room is going to sound worse than a budget-friendly $100 microphone that you're recording in your closet with, or just throwing a blanket over your head. Don't do that, though, because it's very hard to work with a blanket over your head for 2 hours.
Although famously, Anthony has recorded specifically loud screams with a blanket, like a heavy duvet over the mic and his own head.
At times in the past. Yeah, and when it comes to like being budget friendly, it's definitely helps. It helps that it's not always nice to be the bottleneck of like, oh, we got the episode on Wednesday, and now I don't have to wrangle anyone else, but I do have to record and edit this fucker by Sunday. But it's
Anthony,
doable.
I have some good news for you. The writer is the bottleneck. You are not. You are the end of the bottle.
I am the end of the bottle. You're correct. I am not the bottleneck.
I'm the bottleneck when I send you something that needs to be recorded on Thursday and I send it to you Wednesday night. That's the bottleneck.
But when we do have the chance to bring in another actor, that's a beautiful treat. I love to direct. I love to work with other actors. And I also find so often that it's easier to edit their stuff than it is mine. It's also a tricky thing to direct yourself. Not because you're not doing well, but because there's no one there to tell you that you're doing fine and you don't need to do that one line 10 times. I wish there was a second Anthony to be like, Jesus Christ, you got it. Fucking stop. We've been here for 2 hours. You got it.
On the editing front, that's what you guys are for me, No, you don't need to do a second draft. No, it's fine. And I'm like, oh no, I just need to polish it a little bit more. No, it's fine.
This was moderation. This moderation is the one that sticks up my head when there were like 5 different versions of that story. And I kept saying, stop. Why you've turned this lady into like fucking Ella Schnorn. You've turned into a fucking Phyrexian praetor.
Are there too many Magic the Gathering references in these little? Are we going to get a cease and desist?
That was productivity. That was productivity.
Not moderation.
That was productivity.
You know what?
Excuse me.
I stand by that process. I think the story as it emerged was correct.
Yes, I agree. I agree that the 4th draft that was a lot like the 2nd draft was correct.
I mean, the irony, of course, is being that that's kind of what the episode is about. That's kind of what the episode is.
It was better. It was better.
It's funny that this happened for productivity, that you just overworked yourself in pursuit of a slightly better performance.
We were just talking about how perfectionism is the enemy of all art.
Did you not learn from the episode that you wrote?
I think I have. Sort of.
You have. Yeah, we've gotten a lot. Things are a lot smoother. I think the other thing, you said this a while ago, but I want to bring back to it just briefly. Alexander mentioned, that stories need to have endings for these like longer, bigger projects, and like you need to figure out the thematic sort of thing that makes sense there. One of the things that's great about making an anthology is that you get to tell stories over and over and over again. And one of the things that is really helpful for any project in the future is like you've written like 100 endings at this point. Like the shape of an ending, all the different kinds of forms that an ending can have, and that's such a valuable thing to have. And you've also written lots of beginnings, and you've written lots of second acts, and you've written lots of different kinds of characters, and having just like those are all things that are sort of in your toolbox. You're running the 5K over and over and over again, and you kind of know what it feels like to run the 5K, and then when you run the 10 or the 15, you'll have like it won't be the same, but you'll have a sense of what it feels like at each phase.
That's a quick tip I will give for anyone who's recording audio drama stuff or directing it. When you finished, when you feel you've gotten the ending right, go back and just re-record the first 2 paragraphs of the story. Once you've gotten the whole thing into your body and into your bones, go back, and I often have our guest performers do that, and 95% of the time I end up using that take of the intro to the story.
That's interesting.
That's a hot tip.
Yeah,
that's a hot tip.
I think a real strong rhyme with writing too.
Oh yeah. Well, with that, let's move on to the last thing, or one of the last things I want to talk about today, which are those 2 most vile heads of the Hydra, marketing and outreach, which I'll say we've gotten a lot better at. We used to be a little bad, I think, at wanting to stay in our sandbox and play with our toys alone. We didn't like playing with the other kids. Part of that, I think, is that we've never been part of a network. really just because we started somewhat in obscurity. Mind you, I think there could be a bit more solidarity with Canadian podcasting and recognizing each other. But that's a whole other can of fish. I don't know. I don't know if we want to talk
It's a
about
whole that's everything in Canadian arts is like that.
Yeah, and it's not that we don't like each other. It's the opposite. We like each other, but somehow aren't getting involved in each other's projects in the ways that maybe a more solidarity driven community would. It's a little odd, but it's okay.
Yeah, I just think it's funny that of the things we have been nominated for, none of them have ever been any sort of Canadian award programming or anything like that.
That's true. Most people don't know that we're Canadian.
Yeah. Most people wouldn't assume. I don't know. Where was I with all that? Yes. But yes, I guess we did open that tin of fish, and now it smells a little bit like mackerel in here, which I don't entirely mind. But if you're out there wondering, do I need to be part of a network? I think the answer is no, but it wouldn't hurt. I think that we do well for an independent operation, especially now, as the years go on. But I do think it would have helped us out in the early days, because I think that's when the benefits of being part of a network have the most impact. Brand recognition, a built-in audience, other shows to help market for you when you launch, support and expertise from an experienced team. But, never say never. There are a lot of people out there who we really like and we want to work with. But for season 10 at least, this very special Decade of Dread, we're going to celebrate that independently. But what do you guys think, though, about all that? What we've learned on the business end, producing, working with other shows, working with networks. How's that been?
Well, I think, we've had the experience of being approached on multiple occasions by networks and, in some cases getting very far into the process of potentially working with a network, and just things you reaching a point where you just kind of realize that you'd rather do it on your own. Not a criticism at all of the networks that have approached us. Many of them are filled with wonderful people who do wonderful work, but there just reaches a point. I think one of the beautiful things about doing the show independently is you get to learn how to do everything. And learning how to do everything is such a valuable skill to have, because it helps you evaluate, your own work. And that's really important. And I also wanted to just mention, the tin of fish Anthony opened up. I do think it's worth mentioning one other thing, which is that some of that is our inability or choice not to reach out to some of these other shows, to talk to them and work with them. And I have made an effort in the lead up to season 10 to be reaching out to more Canadian shows, to talk to Canadian creators, to try and find a way that we can work together. And I've gotten really positive responses. So maybe it is just like this feeling that we're not supposed to ask for help or not supposed to work together in some way. But I've been pleasantly surprised with that. That's just been a very nice thing to go into, especially because famously between the three of us, we're famous to each other for this. We have never spent a dime on advertising. The show is entirely word of mouth. If you found the show, it's not because we paid somebody to put it out there. At most, what we do is we'll swap sort of advertising time or promo swaps with other shows, that kind of thing.
Which we also didn't do for the longest time, which we should have been doing.
That's
a lot
new.
longer.
We built, probably up until season 8, I think we had never done any sort of real outreach besides posting each episode on Reddit and on our social media. And that was our outreach. And I take the blame for that because I don't write as much as Alexander and I don't do any of the performing like Anthony does. I feel like this should have been my job early on. But I've started taking it more seriously.
None of us knew what we were doing,
And none of us
just
wanted
in the same
to
way
do
that
it.
yeah, exactly.
Again, this is the big pro of joining a network. If you've got a kernel and you want to give it to a network and you don't want to do any of this, then you know what you want to do. You know what to do.
This is I think a wrinkle, which is that the promise of a podcast network is we're going to do all this stuff for you that you don't want to do. But this is stuff that I don't want to do, but I also don't want to take out the garbage to the back of my apartment. But I'm just not convinced about the economics of having someone else take out the apartment garbage for me. I think that's something I kind of just got to do myself.
All I'll say is that I think that there are obviously networks that make that make sense, that make the taking the garbage from your apartment out to the curb, like where that work makes sense and they have found a way to make that work for them. There are also networks that are operating in what I would call a more predatory way that we have had experiences with. I'll say this, it's none of the major sort of fiction podcasting networks have had this issue, but there are always going to be people that are going to reach out to you and be like, hey, like they promise you the moon and then
we're going to 10x your audience.
Yeah, and then they promise you the moon, and then when it comes to actually signing the documents, there's like a section in there that says we own 50% of your show, or something like that, and that's ridiculous. Like that's crazy. Again, it's none of the networks that have large stables of fiction podcasts have ever sort of approached it in that way. In my experience, you know, maybe other people have different stories, but like occasionally, you know, someone will reach out and their promises are ridiculous, and then you'll see in whatever boilerplate quote unquote contract they send you that they own 50% of your show and your children or something like that. Like it's crazy.
The children is one thing, but my show?
Yeah. Podcasting's like an unregulated, like there's no union. You know, Alexander and I have been a part of the WGC for 10 years. When we were working on Canadian television shows, you have essentially a guild backing you up, and that means that there are minimums that need to be fulfilled in order for someone to hire you, and that is not the case in podcasting. There is not as much protection as there should be, which means that you can actually end up in a situation where you are signing a contract that should be, if you had a guild, they would have prevented you from signing it. Mm-hmm. Or at least have given you access to legal resources to fight the contract. That doesn't exist. So if you do decide you want to work with a network, that's just one piece of advice. Make sure you get, like, on the business side of this, make sure you have like either a lawyer or like even just a paralegal, someone read that contract before you really consider signing it.
Or a friend who is a lawyer. Ultimately, in addition to this metaphor about the garbage, Spotify's eaten half the food in your fridge anyway to begin with, so
yeah,
there's that. And I think there's situations where it still does work. If you're the type of person who you produce an insular season, you do that's a show, that's done, you move on to the next show, it's probably worth it, because you don't have 10 seasons to like ramp up engagement. You want that to hit the ground running, so then you can pack up, okay, that's great, we did that, let's go do our next show. There's people who do that, and they're very good at it. And for that, I think a network makes sense. What the hell else was I going to say? But yeah, there's some more lessons. Read your contracts. There are a bunch of lovely people out there. It's nice to work with other people. It's great to collaborate. It's been a lot of fun collaborating with other shows, which I still can't believe we didn't do before season 8. And even like it's lovely to bring in other performers who have worked in other shows, and then they go off back to their show and they say, "Oh yeah, Rock Station had a lovely time over there." It's nice to build that community. And speaking of that, going to a different kind of community, I think also in terms of marketing outreach, a real change for us over the second half of our show, a big boon, a big lesson has been us figuring out our Patreon, which is to say, making a couple of different shows that are something that we can do a little bit more easily than our scripted content, but I think still provide very good value and are this built-in way to engage with all of you. It's a really lovely community over there, and I think as much as we're tooting our horns over here about what we've learned and how we've converted that into success for the show, it's those folks over there who really make the main feed show possible. And I think, one hand really washes the other with that. The pledge drive that we did for season 8 brought a lot of folks over there, which let us focus more on the show, which lets us do 31 episodes in 31 days again for this October. Yeah. But, we'll get into that more next time. Fellas, last question. What haven't you learned?
Microphone etiquette.
How to stop loving you.
I have not learned to stop doing plays in October when we're producing a fuck ton of episodes.
Are you doing that again?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. Alexander, Jacob, thank you both.
Thank you.
And thank you. Yes, you. For listening.